Yes, thank you. I'm glad you said that before this came on.
But it essentially went and looked at all of the various states and ranked their social studies curriculum. And they picked South Carolina as the one that they graded as an A. Like Missouri's got an F. And we went through and looked at all, and then we went and found South Carolina social studies here as we started looking at them. I also sent this to our curriculum coordinator for Rockwood, and this is what she sent me back. This was after we were done. She says, regarding Fordham, I am not a proponent of their perspective regarding social studies instruction since I do not see it reflective of 21st century learning. If you are interested in looking at a document that is strong and specific content yet balanced with critical thinking and inquiry necessary to promote engaged, informed citizens, look at the newly released Connecticut Social Studies Framework documents. And then she sent me Connecticut's. So I just want to make sure you guys did kind of share that. So I haven't had a chance to really go through Connecticut's, but she did then send me the link to Connecticut's. So, you know, that's kind of backwards just a little bit, but you know.
Well, I don't think it's the content. It doesn't sound like the content that bothers her about South Carolina.
Right. I think she was more speaking. Actually, hers is more. I didn't mention South Carolina specifically. I just said, I sent her the link from Fordham stuff, and so what do you think of these? I think she was saying she's not a big proponent of the way that Fordham was grading, what they were putting emphasis on may not be where she put emphasis.
The emphasis wasn't on inquiry.
Right. That's the key. It's
Right.
not inquiry. Where, so it is a good picture probably of some of the chunks of content. It just doesn't have the emphasis on inquiry.
Looking at Connecticut's kindergartens, me and my community, grade 1, society and ourselves. Grade 2 is making a difference. Grade 3 is Connecticut and local history. Grade 4 is United States geography. Grade 5 is early United States history. And then it goes to world regional studies and then United States history in 8th grade. World regional studies are 6th and 7th grade.
6th and 7th? So they split that.
Well, that's kind of proving at this point. But the otherwise expanding horizons model sounds like it's there.
But second grade, what was it? It was.
Making a difference.
It doesn't really fit with the expanding horizons. I mean, like what we have, I guess. And then. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Mike, I remember the conversations we had when we got to 2nd grade and 4th grade was, is this meaty enough? Second, when we were looking through the 2nd grade and 4th grade, I felt like that was where we had that was where the toughest ones they kind of fill were, which you can see what they did. In 4th grade was they did what we kind of talked about, which was figure out some way to tie it with 5th. Then 2nd grade they came up with a different theme that maybe didn't fit there, but maybe it's more action based is what it almost looks like to me.
What is critical? I mean, I would think it would be important to prioritize these so that it's clear in whatever document is created, it's clear to teachers where the priority lies, where you linger longer.
Mm-hmm. Did you say linger longer?
Linger longer.
The beginning of their document is a whole section on inquiry, one inquiry based, the inquiry process, and how they would expect teachers. But it says, as noted above, initially teachers will engage the students in inquiry through a compelling question. By our definition, a compelling question, it gives 3 bullet points, and then it talks about the C3 and how they combine the C3 into it.
We just had a K-5 curriculum writing and social studies day yesterday, and reorganized by inquiry threads. And so in each unit, there's an essential question. And then under that, there could be anywhere from 1 to 5 I can statements. But then under the I can statements, it's like I can compare
looks like they've also,
Pretty recent, February.
right.
Probably.
I know they've also aligned it to Common Core as well. Did you see that? So they're trying to align it to literacy, even if it's not Common Core. They're trying to align it to literacy.
Maybe people need to get offline.
My connection suddenly slowed way down.
I was flying there for a while.
I don't know how far, I'm almost 20 pages in, they haven't even started really talking about it, because we need some definite professional development.
Yeah, you were looking at Connecticut.
Yeah.
Looking at what?
The Connecticut standards.
Right.
So you write, you have people like us who write, we put together frameworks, and then the rollout has gaps because it is unique from science and Greek, it is unique from ELA, it is unique from math, and yet we don't always set aside the attentional focus and time and money to train teachers on how to do it effectively.
Well, I was working with some teachers on curriculum, and they were, I think it was third grade economics is what the unit this teacher was working on. And I suggested that we pull in, no, it was, scratch that, it was a geography unit. She changed her mind. So we were looking at a geography unit. And I suggested, I asked the question, what primary source maps have you thought about using? And she was like, what do you mean? And so I said, well, what if we laid this map beside this map with this, and we look at, so I started talking about the inquiry process, and she said, I've never thought of that before. And I'm like, man, we need Kathy to work on this.
I saw that assistant posting.
Yeah, see, we have a position open. But yeah, it was,
It's the hardest thing for the teacher candidates I work with to do. Because when I have them design lessons and units, I intentionally, when they write up the outcomes, they have to use a standard that's a content standard and an inquiry standard. And they're all used to the content standards from what they see out in the classrooms. But to intentionally design what they're teaching using the inquiry changes everything. And it also means that oftentimes they can't just steal something offline. Where they can go online and say, okay, this is kind of a flag lesson, let's use this one. Well, it's not the same.
See, when I was that's the problem I ran into when I was teaching the Education 300 course, where they were talking about creating lesson plans. One of my students came back who had been subbing in a bigger district and said,
They write the curriculum.
They write the curriculum, and they said, now here's the other thing though. They have modules. They taught modules in the curriculum and say, this is, why do we have to be able to write lesson plans if they give us the modules? And I kind of stumbled around for a while, and then I said, you have to know the basics, how to put it together. If you don't know the basics on how it's put together, if a student doesn't understand the modules, what are you going to do then? You have to have another way around it. So, but again, the scripted stuff, that's a disservice to the teachers coming in now, because they're handed that reading and that math, and it's all scripted. And if it doesn't work, then they sit there and go,
Right.
okay.
So we are always ready.
Yes, let's get started. We were trying to write the big picture before we left on Friday a month ago. Because what we noticed, if you just started with looking at these individual glees, it didn't make sense. We didn't have a big picture to work from, and so we couldn't even think through these glees. So that's why we wrote those five, to give us an idea of what is the big picture. So today, we need to take the big picture and kind of flesh it out amongst the individual glees. And if we choose to go with the formatting or close to the formatting of the 712, then I don't know how. I mean, we'll have to do some work to make ours kind of fit their format. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take what they have with sixth grade and just send it to everybody so you can see. As I was talking with Brian, the head of their committee, I don't think we want to change what we're doing to fit what they're doing.
He and I have discussed about it.
Oh, good.
Since his
Okay.
course.
Well,
I think the nature of ours is different. That's what I'm sorry.
right, no, keep going. Tell us.
Well, I think they're I don't know that they're changing content as much as they're focusing on content, but they're changing the format to focus on the inquiry as the avenue to the content. But, you know, and as he was working with the K-5 team yesterday too, as we were working on curriculum writing the day before we were planning it out, and he was talking about not being so specific, you know, and at the same time, because I was talking about how our group is going through this format first, and then looking at another format that's teacher friendly, because we have an obligation to building the foundation of inquiry skills that they're expecting to already exist, and you have to break those down. You have to figure out what that's supposed to be.
Right.
And so I was kind of arguing for, yes, this document is very hard to work through, and yet we have an obligation to it that 612 doesn't have. I think.
I agree
So,
completely.
anyway.
Very good point.
He said, you know,
Right.
at some point you have to learn what a map key is
Right.
in and of itself. So,
Yours is definitely more global. They assume teachers know a lot. And the element, so where they pick up, you've got content-specific teachers. Right. Where we are, we're trying to work it in wherever we can. So, good or bad, I think we have to look at the more specific.
I'm telling you, the new certification standards for elementary though have content on them.
You
So-
take two tests now.
Yeah, and I mean, the tests are harder.
Yeah.
So if you look at, the amount of, or the degree of difficulty of knowledge, it's gone up. It's much higher now for the future elementary. It's going to be much higher.
Is there, this sounds bad, but is there a way we could get a look at that content?
Oh, yeah, it's online.
Is it online now?
At least the test scores are, and that's what we're rewriting our programs to. So
Okay.
you can download it and see what the test is gonna be. And I'll have it, I can share that with you, I have it here somewhere.
So, our goal for today then
Yep.
is to, now that we have the big picture, is to put that on here. If, let's take a couple of minutes, 10:48. Let's start this process at 11. Start looking at this. Take the next few minutes and reacquaint yourself with what's written over there. And if you have questions or you've thought about something you think that doesn't really work, just kind of get that back in your mind, and then we'll get to where we're starting to work on that. If you need another one of these, I've got them. If you want to make notes or whatever.
Craig, one thing before we get started with that, was there any discussion about the concepts on the left-hand column in the existing standards?
No.
Because when I read this, that's what was driving a lot of what they put where, it seems to, or what they include. So I think that's something else to keep in mind. How much of those concepts do you think are valid ones? And
Well, as we scroll through, I think that'd be great.
on your district?
We do.
You still do?
I know my kids in fourth grade, and they're doing some of that this year already.
I don't think ours does.
It's not the standard.
No, but that's what it says.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I noticed early on.
It's not the standard.
It's not in the standards, but that used to be the mainstay. So,
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
because when I clean my closet out, I found all that stuff. Now the squiggly line after reconstruction, why did we put that squiggly line?
That's where it stops now.
Yeah, that's where it stops now.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fifth grade.
Yep. When we were thinking about this, that's not a lot of detail, is it? Just the basic countries that explored North American continent. We're talking about explorations.
I'm not sure.
Focusing in on the group.
We didn't get real specific on what they meant. I mean, I know in the past, kind of what that looked like was you kind of started with European exploration. And you did a little bit on maybe some of the Vikings, but it wasn't as much before you got into Prince Henry the Navigator.
And that's the way that used to be, you know.
And we would start off with trade routes, so you may even start
Yeah.
off with Marco Polo because that was initially what led to some of the other explorers. So you may start a little bit like with things like that, and then you have like Prince Henry the Navigator, and you got people that were going around Africa. And that was actually what led to them trying to go west, was trying to get to, like, find a faster route to Asia.
That was Columbus's idea anyway.
lost Aaron?
Aaron, where did Aaron go?
He went to see if anybody parked in his spot. He was calling back to school, wanted somebody to check the parking lot real quick.
Take down tag number.
Parking spot?
I don't think it's tagged in, but I know the cars. There's only so many of us.
So we did this last Friday, a month ago Friday. We went through all the concepts before we actually started playing with this. Would you like us to talk through it's only like 7 or 8 concepts. The rest of them are
I'm
blank.
just curious whether you'd consider those and whether you kept them or deleted them or.
We didn't do either. We just read over them.
Yeah, we talked about them at some point. I remember we specifically talked about.
Right. Right, so we just kind of read over them, and that's, when we started looking at that, we thought we needed a big picture before we looked at those. So if you want,
Well, let me pull the progress.
oh, you're not holding up progress, we're, so it goes to I think, and then the rest are blank.
Right.
One of the things that we talked about specifically had to do with, and it was an issue on my part. On G, it says knowledge of contributions of non-Missourians. I thought it probably, I have to find my little sheet of paper. I thought it needed to say something instead of non-Missourians. You probably need to include something about pre-Missourians or something. I think that.
Right, because they'd included Native American peoples in
Right.
the category.
And so I just don't like.
Interesting distinction.
Right, I don't like the word non-Missourians. They were here before my relatives
Somewhere
were.
though.
Do what?
You put it somewhere.
Did I put it somewhere on there?
I really thought you did.
I did too. I don't see it. I may have written it somewhere else.
Was it on the chart?
I may have been. But I thought I wrote it down somewhere. That's right. Thought I had it written on here, but maybe I didn't. I don't see it. But that was one of the things when I looked at the concept, I thought, that's really the way we look at it. Are they non-Missourians, or are they free, or native Missourians? I don't know what the wording is, but.
Martin Luther King,
Yep.
Jefferson,
In one
of
and
them.
that line though.
Right.
Right. Well, I guess the distinction you could make are, Native Americans, Missourians only
Developing
exist
people.
after Missouri is established as a state.
Right.
So maybe that was the
There's
distinction
one
they were
of the
making.
contribution, Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
But see, look at
Well,
this.
over here you had famous Americans, but then you crossed it out and said Missourians.
Well,
Could it be knowledge and contributions of important historical figures? I mean, that language in the Strand doesn't go anywhere in the grade level
Right.
standard.
Right.
Wonder why the specifics was to separate them. I mean, what was the intent behind separating them?
I think because most of it's written as, in the concepts, it's almost all Missourians.
Yeah.
And then it becomes, do we want young people to also recognize contributions of, say, any of the founding fathers, none of which being Missouri.
Right. But look at
Or,
it,
Missouri.
non-Missouri.
Yeah, you know.
Because there's a Missourians one up there, right? That's where.
There was one, yeah.
the-
Thomas Hart
the-
Benton was up in there.
Yeah, there is a specific
That's
Missouri
where-
That's grade 4.
Right.
Is that fourth grade?
So it's just distinguishing between that one.
Yes.
And.
Yes.
So that you can say, we should acknowledge that there are famous people outside of Missouri.
Well, Lewis and Clark,
Right.
Missouri, you should.
Well, this
As
is-
hard as it is to say.
But at the second grade level, look how they have the Indians.
Yeah, the
Right.
Native Americans.
Right.
It's an odd placement.
So I just think we need to work on concept language. Or we don't have to, we can.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I like what it says, like historic figures.
Historical figures, yeah.
But it's also groups. Maybe people's, the way people's.
Right.
Individual groups.
Is that gonna be a problem? I mean, using non-Missourians, does that trigger some, you know what I mean?
Well, that's what's currently in there.
Right, I just wondered if that is
Well,
that, I'm not trying, cause I'm not, is that a big, cause to me, that's what I think of as, you're kinda in the Missouri history thing, but there were other important people.
Right, so
Right.
Is it important how we call them?
I'm just trying to think for the concept of, sometimes we approach history, the historical story as Missouri didn't exist until Europeans got here. And the state
Wasn't outlined here.
wasn't a state until later, but, I mean, there were pre-Missourians that were here way before, white Missourians for sure. And so I just think that, how can we write it to help teachers realize that oh, this is, native Missourians? Should we call them non-Missourians, or do we call them, I don't know.
Well,
It's just a question.
Yeah, because if you look at earlier concepts, A and B, they're both about sort of pre-Missouri or the development of Missouri.
Right.
Because A is understand the migrations of people from many regions to North America. And the one elementary standard is the viability and diversity of Native American culture before Europeans came. It's all the way out there in grade 5, which is, seems like that's something we might want to touch on earlier.
And we played with that a little bit. We didn't,
And the same with knowledge of the ways Missourians have interacted, survived, and progressed from the distant past to present. So the next one. Because we're talking about the distant past, you would think that would incorporate people who existed before there was the state of Missouri. Right?
yes, we would.
So maybe that's a place where that would fit better than saying non-Missourians.
Right, so maybe this standard should just be moved up, this second grade piece.
Makes sense to me, but I don't
Right.
know how other people feel about
Move it
that.
up
But
where?
that could go up to the concept B.
Concept B.
Concept B.
right. Seems like.
Since that concept already says, the distant past.
right. So, in concept A, we're talking about migrations. Here are some of the thoughts we had from last time. And we weren't even, all of them we talked about, we weren't even sure we liked the one that's on grade 5.
Right, I agree.
It's really, right,
Yeah.
it's nebulous. How do you, what's that mean? What's that mean for teachers when they're looking at it? It's really hard to understand.
Well, for me, I know, in working with teachers, a big question is, like you said, what's that mean? And there's almost embedded in that, you're having the students make a judgment about two things like viability and diversity. So the diversity one is an easy kind of knowledge one. You say, well, look, there were all these Native American tribes. There were viability one is an interesting thing to teach. And so you end up, I think, teaching, if you're honestly teaching that, then what it is, you know, what did it take for them to maintain their lifestyle and how did that change?
Right.
And what changed it? Interesting question. But I'm not sure you really, I don't know, it's an odd one to put those two together the way they have.
And it's a flyby.
Mm-hmm. It really is.
You don't have
It's
time to
grade
teach
that's
that.
already crowded.
Right, you don't have time to teach the viability.
And what usually, at least what I see is, what usually happens is they're also looking across the nation. So viability of Native American peoples across the nation. So I'm not real sure, you know, the intentionality of it. You know, we talk about education being purposeful. What's the purpose of that? And is it really achieving that purpose?
Right.
I'm not sure. Well, what's also interesting is that A also could be interpreted, concept A could also be interpreted as something that is not just Native American. It could actually open up to immigration.
Hey, yes, absolutely. So,
But it's
and that's why
always
we were.
yeah. But I mean,
we were
also,
throwing
yeah,
in
exactly.
these- We were talking. That was our
Yeah,
conversation.
it's
last
not
time.
just that it has to be the founding of the
Right.
country. This could be a
Absolutely.
place where we can talk about how most of Americans came from someplace else at some point in history.
Right. So that's what we were trying to start fleshing out.
Which would be a nice connection to that self-school regions, all of that sort of thing.
That's when we decided we couldn't keep this up until we had a big picture of what history we were looking at. So now that we know that,
Was that what other people think too? That this is a place to talk about where we came from as a people?
I think we talked about that some, didn't we? Last time? I think that's also, that's what led us to looking at how far back do we go? Or you know, what is it, we want to make sure, I remember it was talking some about making sure we didn't mention, that we didn't, you know, are we missing any parts of where we may be big spaces of immigration of people that are coming, and that's how creative, like Chinese immigration tied to westward expansion was kind of discussion, but are we missing groups and other things that may be coming in? But, I'm not sure if what I'm saying is making any sense. I remember us having that conversation last time.
Well, okay, so what I'm doing is I'm looking at the existing standards. The one place where we talk about immigrants from Europe is in grade 5, and we're already talking about how crowded grade 5 is. Actually, but that's not even about them immigrating. So grade 4 has located and described settlements in Missouri of people of European and African heritage.
Pat, when we think immigration, what do you generally think of? I mean, I think Ellis Island, all of those things, which is more, we've never gone that far, but we don't get to that. When we talk about history, it maybe kind of come in different places. So if you look through our American history, we usually stop at Reconstruction.
right?
So we haven't gotten to some of those things, or it's worked into a different format. Like I know we do it, at our school, we do a huge immigration lesson in 3rd grade. But to be honest with you, in terms of some of these things, yeah, I'm not real sure how it ends up in there, other than maybe it comes in through religion at 6. My guess is it comes in at 6 or 5, either through geography or through the relationships to institutions.
It's 6.
I don't know where, you know, honestly, I don't even know. I know they do it, it's a huge, they do a whole, I mean, the teachers dress up, and we do a huge event where they have parents come in, they watch the kids are immigrants, and they go through different phases, they actually build a mock Ellis Island, and the kids kind of rotate through it, and go to see doctors.
The only thing I'm seeing in history in elementary right now would probably be 4th grade, located described settlements in Missouri of discussion, because those people came from someplace, obviously.
We do a unit in fifth, we have a unit written in fifth grade. We don't get to it most years, but there is a unit that really talks with that period between 1880 and 1920, somewhere in there. That's why we barely ever get to it, but it's all about geography.
There's nothing in 6.
So we have migrations in the United States in fifth grade under geography, which might be
Yeah, so there's also in geography, described by people of different groups settle more in one place than another, which might open himself up for an immigration discussion. And native heads, I seem to recall that there was something about, that opened itself up to Ellis Island. Oh, maybe it's individuals and groups.
That's in 6. That's what I was just looking at.
Yeah, I can't find it.
Because it's in all the 13
Yeah, I can't
textbooks.
find it. Isn't that funny? Because I could have swore it was in.
I know they do it. It's a great lesson, so I'm all fine with them continuing to do it.
But there's no place for it, right?
Oh, I'm not seeing it.
I'm not either, so I'm gonna go to my old,
It's our district curriculum, I don't know.
in terms of what I teach.
It's in a lot of districts.
I know.
Well, that's like character ed. There's no character ed in standards, but it's in a lot of districts.
Citizenship.
Find it.
Citizens, find it in there.
Find it. Find it.
I'll say honestly, to me, when we talk about it, what I also said is that it's not in your curriculum anywhere, so if this is something we say is important, we have to actually take the time to do it because it's not in your
Absolutely, absolutely. And it didn't hurt that there was a lot of money put behind it.
Right. That was beneficial.
Are you talking about on H, 6th page? Found something about that is.
Whether it's, it doesn't really, we may not even know whether it's there or not, if it's something we want to make sure is
Yeah,
there.
I'm with
we
you.
can kind of move forward with it.
Right.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think a nice place could be either an A or B.
You put what in there again?
Put in something about immigration.
Laura says we wouldn't have one.
Or in- What do you feel like you have in that, Laura? She's from Farmington, so,
Yeah, that's where I try to work it in.
What'd you say?
When I work with teacher candidates,
hours south of St. Louis.
I work it in, under the 4th grade standard, locate and describe settlements in Missouri of people of European Mexican heritage, because it's a way to say, well, okay, there's settlements, where did they come from?
Right.
Like all the stuff, right, everything underneath St. Louis and Farmington, obviously, yeah.
Which one is that?
It's 4th grade C.
Let's see, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So that's where I work it in, but I think, I guess I would.
Are you on Google Drive?
I was trying to figure out how to change the label, if we take off that tools of inquiry header.
15.01.
Okay.
Oh,
let me
yeah.
continue.
It's trying to
I stopped trying to find
All
it.
of this is not what that is.
Okay, let me give you this link.
Okay, so
Now,
maybe
it's still that, because that tools of inquiry header, when it uploaded into Google out of the other doc, it put tools of inquiry on top of everything, so
Right.
it's just.
Well, she has
See that
the, She has the
tentative.
old copy.
Oh,
Because I started a new one for today, so we keep our
Okay,
notes
I've
separate where.
just been scrolling.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, I can look
I
up there and
screwed
see
up.
it then.
Did you send us a new one then?
You are shared if you have Google Docs. She doesn't have a Google Doc, so. No, you are exactly right. I'll send it to you real quick. Sorry.
That's okay, I can look up there with that, I just kept thinking once and I.
What's the, what's your email address?
So I thought you were, I was waiting, Shelley Jones 60 at Yahoo.
Shelley Jones 60 at Yahoo.
It's
Alright, let's do this first. Okay, so if we look at A again, anybody want to give a thought of so here's the migration of native Missourians, pre-European settlement. An anonymous raccoon.
I saw the same thing, I was wondering,
Yeah.
what's an anonymous raccoon?
That's one of you guys, I guess. Not me.
Do you see those are the people that have joined up there at the top?
that's.
Oh, no,
that's Laura.
Laura's the L.
Laura's the
Laura's the
L,
L,
and Kathy.
Kathy's that, so who's the?
Who's the anonymous raccoon?
Is that Paul, is it Paul who used to be on the committee and hasn't resigned? Or did he resign? No, he just stopped coming, he said he wasn't coming anymore, but he wasn't gonna resign. That's his words.
Is it you?
So
Well,
who is
she
that?
said is it?
Inquire.
Because it has to be somebody you shared it with.
Good morning, anonymous raccoon.
Right. That's funny. I don't know. It could be Tony maybe. I don't know.
Maybe it's Tony.
Right, because I shared it with everybody, so if they've got Google, it gave them enough, it told them, hey, we shared this with you. That's really funny. Okay, so if we're looking at migrations to this area, we've got the native Missourians, the pre-European settlement, that's in third grade. Because it's looking at the state. Is that where we want to keep that? We're also talking about Lewis and Clark and westward expansion for third grade. So the question that we had on that was, do we want to include the Chinese immigration as far as westward expansion, or the railroad coming?
Or would westward expansion automatically make you think of those things? Or just needs to be written in the westward expansion?
Well, we've
That
got a
includes all those
we've
things.
got a westward expansion lead a few down. So do we go ahead and tie it in here, or do we assume it's underneath the westward expansion code?
What did we end up doing with regions in second grade? Did it go to world regions?
We talked about that, but we didn't write it.
Is there a separate one on explorers that's different from migration? I'm having a hard time, I can't even get the document to move through a day today. It like stunts, like it'll move like, and then it locks. I don't know. I'm having a hard time scrolling. looking for what we did in geography,
In geography.
because
Here's economics, geography next. Oh, it's still history. History goes on forever. Okay, here's economics. Geography. Well, here's regions of the world. And so we have both of those up there. Did we, I don't know if we've got anything. Physical characteristics, topography.
which concepts?
Don't say it louder, because I know.
I think I answered my question.
Okay.
We're just not there yet.
So it seems to me there's two approaches we can take here. We can look at the concepts and say, do we need to add something at a different grade level in each one of these concepts that helps scaffold the knowledge to where they need to be by grade 5? Alternatively, we can look at what existing standards are and say, are these sitting where they need to be, or should they be moved to one of the many empty cells that exist? And it seems to me you could go either direction. I tend to lean towards the second for me, because we've got that in front of us and we could go point out and say, okay, yeah, that fits there, that one fits there. You know, we know grade 4 or 5 is really heavy. Are there any in grade 5 that we think would make sense to move to another grade? That sort of thing. Just a strategy, overall strategy.
Right, on my history,
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to figure out a while ago.
Because we know grade 5 is crazy heavy, and if you went through grade 5, would you say, are there any, so for instance, grade 5C, outline the discovery, exploration, early settlement of America.
I thought we moved that down to 4.
Would that could conceivably go into concept A, understanding migrations of people from many regions to North America, and be a regional standard.
Didn't know what we had in 4th grade on the settlements. Our
C is
regions.
discovery, exploration, and settlement.
Right.
I think if you were, I could see early exploration in concept C having some things go down. But migration, I think, is a more difficult concept for you.
Really? People moving from one place to another?
They're quite a mobile society now.
I think that's an oversimplification of what the point I was trying to make, but, I think it partly has to do with concept of time. And I worked a lot with second graders with westward expansion
migration is
Oh.
definitely different than moving from one town to another. I mean, that, like you said.
No, I was
is
thinking,
more like
what would
geese.
they connect?
Why?
Geese migration. I mean,
I'm
because
with
you
you.
would have to build
Or
such
trees.
understanding of that vocabulary term. That's probably where I would start.
Right.
Their motivation for migrating has to do, is different than our motivation for migrating.
Well,
But it's,
sometimes.
I mean, you would really.
The drive for food,
It's
the
push
drive
pull
for,
factor.
right,
Yeah,
the push,
or-
right.
But I think if you were putting a standard in there, like migration, I think a second grade teacher might be like, just trying to visualize that, that's very different to me than why do people move from place to place.
So if
So
we're
it would
studying
be-
migration, you think third grade is as low as you would push that kind of thing?
I think you could do, describe reasons why people move from place to place for grade 2, or even grade 1,
Mhm.
but I wouldn't put migration in. I guess that's what I'm saying.
And we have that in geography already. I believe we have, why people move.
Is it also the question of why did people settle in these areas once they moved?
That's part of the geography.
That's part of geography part 2 then?
I think the concepts overlap a lot.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if you want to simplify it for little kids, migrate is, on the rural level, you could do it with animals. You know, versus in a city. There was a what?
That's why I said geese. That's what.
Yeah.
Although robins, I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
The robins are migrating. I mean, we have robins all the time.
We do.
You have a larger population at certain times.
Geese have stayed on for 2. We have about a 1 acre pond up there that they seem to land in, and all of a sudden it says, usually it's just kind of lay and stay there a little bit and move. Now it's like, I wish woodpeckers would migrate.
Usually doesn't, so it wasn't something you guys. I didn't, I just thought it might.
No,
It's really just terminology. You can say why
Mhm.
people move place to place or you can say migration. Migration sounds to mature.
Just know what the word means. I mean, what does to migrate mean?
And we're talking about which grade level here?
Second? Is that what we're talking about?
well, we're talking about moving down.
Moving down.
So in first grade, what do we talk about? We talk about school and community. So
Yep.
what if it's just, what did our community look like this night, and what did the community look like this long ago? Why might it be different? And I don't know if it needs, because I'm just looking at the community changing, and some of that may be people, but I don't know. We can do either of these both.
But it's just remarkable, there's nothing in the elementary history standards about immigration.
No, are they waiting till after 6th grade when it
Doesn't
doesn't
exist.
history?
I think that so
And
much
then-
of it's the founding of a country, and before you can actually have the country, they may not consider it immigration. You know, you'd have to immigrate to a place, and the place doesn't actually exist, and the way that I think it's probably been looked at before. So it's probably more migratory than it is anything else, and it's just covered through the founding of the country. That there were people that moved here.
That's
I think
the
that's
thought I
the
had when I
overall theme.
thought of
is-
migration, more of a people's moving rather than a family moving or a
Right.
person moving. That's,
I think it should
So
still
we're
in without
changing the
necessarily
concept.
labeling, and I think it's as big, I think it's been there, it's just, when, like, so I said, when we talk about immigration, what most people go right to is like Ellis Island, which we don't cover because we don't go that far into.
What grade did you say you did that in?
That was in third grade, you know, but so it may, but in terms of not having any standards, you know, I think that's probably part of it, is that when
That's
you
just
come.
something you guys do.
Yeah, well, we've done it, and I don't know, I don't really, we don't know why they did it in there, but,
That's geography. Yeah.
Yes.
so,
So
yeah.
I moved it to C.
I think in some ways it probably does make sense in geography, because you're talking push-pull factors, but. unless you're looking at this change to the society over time because of immigration. Like, what are the factors? What happens because of immigration? I think those are different, and that may even be better somewhere in 6, or it could be, I don't know. Like, how has immigration impacted our country? I don't know. What are the historical ramifications of it? I don't know. That may come in later.
The other thing that strikes me is that in that concept A, there's only one cell, and it actually doesn't really relate to the concept. So if nothing else, I think we should address that.
I'm not sure. Kathy, do you know where we moved H?
Some rights of viability and diversity. Yeah.
For which strand?
Here's a geography H.
That doesn't help me understand migration of people from these regions to North America.
It's the identify major causes of population distribution.
That is assuming that there are native
That was on
here.
H, so somewhere.
Did we
Did
put it
something that
in,
changed it.
we feel like it was encompassed in the human one, the human characteristics?
And maybe so. That's what I'm trying to.
We have settlement and work right there.
Right. And maybe we decided that's how it fit, and we just left it.
So, and what you put in about about Chinese workers is in the migration by the standards which we're talking about migration. It's actually immigration.
It's immigration.
Right. So it's also somewhat problematic there.
So, looking up the definition of migrate and immigrate, I mean, you take the him off, you got migrate. You know, so when we're talking about migrate, are we talking about within a country? We're
That's not what this says.
That's what I was thinking.
This is talking land bridge.
This is talking land bridge. So
Right.
That's what we were talking about earlier.
But that's
too.
not there.
And we had that conversation last time.
Okay.
Right.
It's this one concept, and in 5th grade, you hit it one time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. It's really talking land bridge.
It's really land bridge is what that is. If you read it literally. To me, that's the way I interpret it.
I mean, if you want to look at it truly from a perspective of just one concept, every settler that came to this country was an immigrant. Even back in the 1500s, 1600s, they were immigrants because they came from a foreign country to a new country, to a new world.
Right. Certainly.
So, can we treat it as such and simplify it that way? Or
It
is
would-
it too confusing?
For me, it would be interesting and probably appropriate given the changing demographics in our country to revisit this concept as immigration versus migration.
Because that's what I'm hearing here. There's a confusing part, but literally the only migration that you have talking about is the movement from east to west, when the people started moving, and we call that the
Actually,
westward
west to east.
expansion, right?
Well, yeah. But
Yeah.
that's not even in this concept.
No, so, but immigration, new people coming to a new world, and they call it the new world. So that would be immigration, the concept is immigration, it's not.
So maybe-
They can move around these food sources.
Right.
They moved on, that's why they.
Yes.
And that was before Europeans came. Is that what that was all about?
Mm-hmm.
And then this one, yeah.
With migration to the world,
right? To North America is what the
within
concept
this
is supposed to be.
country as well as some of this country. That's
Yeah.
actually why they put migration instead of immigration.
It's immigration. If you're looking at the true concept, it's immigration. It's not migration.
But the reason they put that here is to include Native Americans for western expansion. Otherwise, you couldn't include that
You know.
Because you're not moving the country.
Well, the western expansion actually is in a concept all by itself.
Right.
It exists on its own.
And
That's where they
immigration,
currently are.
see, that migration shouldn't be migration, it should be immigration, in my opinion.
People's motivations are her choice.
I was just trying to find where we have it in our document.
What you looking for, Craig?
Identify the major patterns of population distribution, demographics, and migrations based on the study of historical and current events. That was a K1, 2, 3, 4. That was a 5th grade group. We have that one marked out in red. I'm assuming we're just assuming that's covered somewhere else in the document. Well, I can't find anywhere where we talk about patterns. Maybe if I look up patterns and see if I can come up with patterns. Where did we put that? So,
Did you settle on immigration or migration?
No.
Which one are we talking about right now?
I'm just trying to see if I can find H. What do we do with so I think we ended up including it in settlement patterns. We just included it as a part of. I think we combined there.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm fine. I just wanted to make sure I knew where we threw it.
So really, the concept A is covered elsewhere.
Not really, I don't think.
It would almost be pretty easy in terms of history that we laid out. Would be Native American migration, of course. And then American migration from south to north and westward expansion. Those to me would be the biggies.
And the land bridge.
And then immigration, you almost have to lay out, do those for common because you'd have several periods of immigration.
Right. You have multiple periods of immigration.
Starting in the 1600s with the settlements of the colonies and all that, and then turn of the century.
Early.
I think if we make that distinction between what migration is and what immigration is, because the more I thought about this, understand the immigration of people from many regions to North America. Or if we're talking about regions of the world. And we discussed that last time too, because what region are we talking?
So do we want to change the concept name? How would we want to change the concept name?
There might be a middle path between migration and immigration, which would be understand the movement of
Right,
people
that's on one.
from many regions to North America and the United States.
I would even go as far as from many regions of the world. Because that would define it.
throw one out there again, say it again.
Understand the movement of people from many regions of the world to North America and the United States, because that gives us pre-U.S. land bridge. And also possible some U.S. immigration patterns.
And then you can actually, in those grade levels, you can introduce the term migrate and immigration.
I mean, even as early as, maybe we would talk about it, even among ourselves, where, people identifying where their cultural heritage is from.
Understand the movement of people.
Understand the movement of people from many regions of the world to North America and the United States.
To North America. And the United States?
Or just / United States. Well, wait a minute, North America is Canada too, and Mexico, so, okay, yeah, and the United States.
So they might note that there was Europeans in what is now Mexico long before there were Europeans in Massachusetts.
Because the Spanish went in there.
Very different.
And the French were up in Canada too.
Right.
Looks like there's something odd about the way that.
Right. No, I think you're right there.
Including the United States, okay.
Or are we focusing on the United States? Well.
Early explorers would be all North America.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Before, I mean, the reason I said what I did was that to take in the historical periods of there, before there was the United States, and now there's the United States.
Right.
And after there was an established United States.
So do we put and or include?
And so for instance, if you're talking about the 13 colonies, if it's not the United States.
Right. I think it's good as it is,
As it is.
including, in my thinking.
I'm just in the movement of people from any regions of the world to North America, including the United States. Sounds good. Now that gets highlighted as. Then you can really strand it out.
Yeah.
Kathy, what do you think?
Well, I just, at some point, we need to have a conversation with the 612 group, because part of what's happening is we're holding these concepts with something that currently goes all the way up, and they're not doing it that way.
Right.
So, should we tailor them for K-5? Because I don't know.
Well, I think we do, because we basically lock off any ones that we currently don't have and ones we don't like. We've done that throughout the process. We said, look, none of this has anything to do with what we
With
teach and
more
what
of
we
a
teach.
global, like, I started thinking, okay, where does that go? And then I thought, well, that may not exist anymore after this process is done.
Right.
So I think I'm talking about that, yeah.
For me, that's okay.
Well, it's the same as all the blanks we have below for us that they have over there.
Okay, so are we okay with it as is? Anybody not okay with this? Or want to try a different suggestion? I'm about to get out the highlight color.
Watch out.
I think the change will help us look at what the K-5 meant, for sure.
I think we take off the United States.
You think so?
Yeah, I know I suggested that, but it was suggested in terms of where it's going below it.
Do you think just North America?
Because you can specify the
We're
US
gonna
at
throw
at
in
level.
different areas,
But what
yeah.
it, what was, because what was there before, it said North America and the United States, and I thought, well, that's really,
Yeah, because you can, just like you can specify migration and immigration, you can specify US.
Mhm.
I was looking at it as a grammar issue, but then in the conversation that follows, it's a non-issue, so I just took it out. There we go.
Okay, anyone else like to add one more?
See, you missed me last time, didn't you?
But now what I think changes it a little bit is that this was migration versus immigration before.
Mhm.
And now that says
It can be
immigration.
either. It can be either. It can be either.
But you're not necessarily, but there are also migrations that happen within the United States.
Yep. That's exactly right. And I think you're actually listed in here under some of the standards in history.
So now we can we put both, because it's movement of people, can we put both?
Mhm. I think you can.
How about if we put and within,
Can I just ask, what is it we're trying to get out of this? Like, what's the end? Like, what is it that we really want kids to know?
that there's, that
It
people
might
move?
help me to just start with,
So what's the
start
bigger-
with fifth grade, and then we look and see if what we have there encompasses what we feel is most important.
So what's the bigger rationale for what we want kids to come away with this? Like, what, I mean, yeah, we want to know people move, but why do we want them to know that? What's the bigger picture piece here?
From my perspective, is for them to understand that the United States, as a nation, is one that's been developed over time by people from other places coming here.
So is that something within fifth grade that we can even answer with the question of how has the United States, I mean, I don't know if that's what it is, or what is it that are, you know, if there's something different? Is it the United States, is it Missouri, is it all of the above? I think I'm just trying to figure out, because I feel like we're spending a lot of time on, and I'm not sure what it is that we're still trying to get. We want, if that's what we want kids to know that people move. What is, I mean,
No, we want children to have a historical understanding that whether it's their own family, whether it's their community, whether it's their state, or whether it's their country, that the people came there from someplace else. And when they came here, that happened in distinct historical periods that also brought with them different cultures, different attitudes, and that, by the way, it's continuing to happen. And within their lifetime, it will be a very different place. And so if we can help them understand that this has been a process over time that has always affected our country, it might help them understand that this history continues as part of our country.
Okay, we talked about this the last time, but I think it's important, I don't know where it would be, very different reasons of why they're coming here now as to why they can move in. Like, I mean, yeah, people are still coming here, but is this gonna be covering why they came here, what they were seeking, what they were doing? Or are we just saying people move here and they're still coming here, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think if we were to flesh out these standards of that, understanding a little bit about push-pull factors of why people move from one place to another, will probably be in there, as well as just some of the basic. I mean, at the earlier levels, we tend to talk more about kind of factual issues, but we want to also build in the understanding of push-pull factors.
Which came in, those push-pull
Westward
factors
expansion.
come in, it comes in westward expansion, but also comes in, economics and geography. And I think we've worked some of that into those other two strands as well. So let's start with grade 5. So what's that mean for, I think you have to look at the historical lens. What happened in these historical lenses? That's what started this whole process. So would it be easier to start with grade 3 and think through what happened in Missouri, and then go to grade 4, what happened in early United States history, and then to grade 5?
Can you say that?
start with grade 3, what happened in Missouri, and then look at grade 4 and grade 5 and build it up.
Is it possible to put the concepts as questions? Because I think if you go with even just what Alden said, could we change some of this to, and I don't know what the concept even looks like, but what I can see is, and I don't know if it's the demographic, I can't quite figure out, especially the one I'm having a harder time with is the nation because it's just so big. But when you're talking, what did our community look like 300 or 200 years ago? What did our community look like 50 years ago? Now, what kind of trends could we see into the future? So that could be a conversation. So there's something in there of just what do these areas, what do places look like, describe the differences. I don't know what it is in there, but then I could see that going from community to what did our state look like? What was kind of the, I don't know if it's demographic breakdown of what the state looked like or what the question actually is. 200 years ago, 50 years ago, now, future, and you're connecting past to future, so there's a connection with history, and just do it at each level on the way up. Because I think having that question, then they start to think, and then maybe the question is what caused those changes, and that connects all of what I feel like we're kind of talking about, and makes that connection between, and then there's a whole other conversation on, and then you can have conversations on what impact does that have, how does that impact your economy, and that's almost like we could create a theme that I could actually teach multiple things through, but I'm just wondering if there's not a way to kind of start looking at tying in some of these questions.
Actually, I think the why would be the geography question. Why?
Right, that, and it ties into
this would be the
right.
What caused
Right.
this history piece would be what caused people to move, what caused the movement of people from the region.
Or even just what did the country look like? And that fact of having to think about what it looked like, that's your history piece. And then those causes may come from push-pull factors, which could be economic, they could be geography, it could be weather pattern, they could be lots of things that may cause people to move. But
I like the idea of changing that, the concept to inquiry and questions. Why? Finding answers to your questions.
You know what?
That's the higher.
What's that? I know you do.
It also forces students to do higher level thinking.
Kevin, if you haven't looked at it yet, you'll want to look at it.
Oh, I have it. But I think there's a balance in looking at, I do think there's a balance in looking at both the inquiry and the content. Which I appreciate happening in the document.
You appreciate what?
That it happened, that it happened, that's visible in their document.
In the
Their framework.
Connecticut framework. So if we're looking, let's just start with third grade, I think in Missouri. So what are those pieces that in Missouri history, past and present, what are those, where we had movement of people?
Well, you had pre-Civil War, where you had Washington, Missouri, and Kansas.
I am. By making this what we've needed, or tentatively making it, it actually allows us to collapse if we wanted to another concept. C. Discovery, exploration, and settlement of the United States. But the only thing about C is that it's more about the past.
But it's also specifically designed for the United States.
Yeah, it's the U.S. But right now they're kind of overlapping, aren't they?
It's a rough morning. I'm confident at some point we get our groove, though. It just takes a while each time to
It
reacquaint
does.
with the process.
It does.
Like, oh.
Throw out all those ideas we got in our heads and see what sticks.
It's a lot better without me.
No,
No.
no,
A
no,
lot
no, that's
clearer.
not what I'm saying at all.
It's okay, you wouldn't be the first person to say it.
No,
Um,
no, I didn't.
That's the Alden I know.
I'm completely joking with you. So I'll throw a proposal out there, shoot it down, or modify it, whatever you think. I actually would keep A and put in, and see if we couldn't work in the concepts and C up into A.
So to move C into A.
I wonder if we could, because of what we've outlined over here, if we could keep the kind of concept at this point that we're looking at, and then like highlight it over there and say, okay, how does that articulate here? Does that make sense?
I'll say it one more time.
Well, we kind of outlined the history within here, and now to go deeper within the concept, if we kind of look here and highlight it, and so if this is kind of the structure we're going with here, how would we break that apart into this concept?
So we need one of those second grade to say, you're gonna look at which one's talking about migration, or however we word it, but whatever goes with that.
So where in fifth grade, with the focus that we put here, would we highlight immigration or settlement or migration? Where would we do that here? Where would we do that in fourth grade? Where would we do that in fifth grade? So if we're looking at fifth grade. we're looking at- I do wish the one that's currently in fourth grade that I'm anticipating we would move, that's in concept C, I think that would be a little clearer.
Well, that would, then you'd lose the Native Americans because they, the land bridge part.
I mean, still keep that.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
I'm saying, I mean, I think you need to keep that.
That needs to stay out.
Fourth grade, the C in fourth grade.
Well, if we locate the square settlements of in Missouri of people of European African heritage, if that became third grade.
This one here. Settlements. Is that what you're talking about?
She's looking at
Yeah.
the,
The harder strand about it.
I think what makes it so hard is there's so little in it, and there's so much that could be in it. I mean, look at all the empty cells.
It's the balance. That it could become very, very, very full.
Yes.
And the balance between what do you I think we have to prioritize, because we can't put everything in here.
Right.
So what are the
Not to
biggie?
mention Patrick Kate's history.
I said. No, I said.
I said that. because you and I
And I'm
agree.
wondering, and I'm kind of concerned that we're operating in minutia, which makes it less and less relevant to many of the students. We've got to find some way to make this relevant, which means we can't get so specific that we end up just doing a steady stream of facts. Yes, kids need to know that people migrated, but I don't need them to check off the box that people migrated, check. So, again, I just don't want to get into little bits and pieces and being really almost too overboard specific.
Yeah, for me, what's interesting about that is how you shared with us how your school has changed dramatically through immigration. This could be a place where it could be taught, why that's happening, what's that like in their everyday life to be relevant, right here in this concept.
Right. But I just think that how we frame it, because what I can talk about in terms of what our school talks about may not be the same way, but I think how we frame it becomes the more important. How do you make that relevant to the kids? Yes, the kids are going to say, okay, great, they know it. Great, these things happen. This happened in our community. It may happen other places. So what exactly does that mean? But if we're talking from a historical standpoint, how do you frame that in a way that makes it make sense to a kid and makes it something that's worthwhile even discussing? If we get to where we're just talking about who and what came and it becomes so fact oriented, I think we lose unless we can somehow tie the relevance. I think we lose that. And that's why I'm kind of asking, I do tend to be more of a big picture person just by nature, but that's why I'm kind of still wondering, what is it that we want them to actually get out of this? I think it's got to be, yes, we want them to know that this happened, so how do we frame that in such a way as to make it relevant and meaningful for kids? And I will say, if we look at whether it's South Carolina we looked at last time, or Connecticut that we looked at this time, those are, like, the reason why I picked those two is those are people that are saying there's at least maybe two different ways of thinking, but I think there's people who've looked at a lot of this that have said these are ones to look at. I don't think either of them go into the minutia that we do. And so I'm worried that we're not just recreating minutia by some of our process. Not that, I mean, the process, not the way to say it, but just like, I feel like we're just moving things around in the same document that we've said isn't good. So I'm careful not to say that we have to keep it the way it is, and if it's not working, I'd say we change it.
My take on that, I think, is we move the pieces that we finish this piece, and then we try to write that other version that's removed. I think for people who are creating curriculum, there needs to be some specifics for you to go back to and say, are we doing these things? But you don't want it to be a checkoff sheet. But I think kids should know that there are certain immigration and certain migration patterns, and I want them to get to the why. I don't know if they'll get to that in K-5. They'll get to some of that, but I want them to be able to think through, especially by the time they get out of high school. Some minutia I think is really important for them to say, am I covering those things that need to be covered in the third grade?
Right.
Or do I rely on a resource?
And I would say, I would probably agree with you. I don't want to get into where we start trying to list all the specific forms of immigration that happen into one area or in these areas. Well, what about this group of people, this group of people? Because there's a good chance we may miss some, or do they really need to know each specific group, or do they need to know this happened?
I think.
I'm not saying we did that. I'm just saying I guess that's my.
I hear what you're saying.
Which is why I kind of went back to the questions of if we're talking about what did Missouri look like 200 years ago versus what did it look like 100 years ago, 50 years ago, today, 50 years from now. I mean, I don't know. Those would be different benchmarks. And I think if you're looking at what Missouri looked like, you're going to see there was a difference in the population 200 years ago than there is now, than there will be in the future. And that leads, and because of it, they're going to come up with, it leads to all the things that we're talking about. Again, I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but I still think that's kind of where we're actually getting to. But it allows some of the inquiry, but it also brings back in the specifics of understanding that these places change They change because people move, and that leads to a geography question, and that all fits in with the answers as to why they move. So I think we get there. I just think there's a way to get there that makes it more meaningful and relevant to the kids.
I think maybe I can help out with this. Identify the major migration groups, immigration groups, and then have them identify the ones that are relevant to our state. Is that what you're talking about? Instead of going into all the little details of the different migrations?
I don't think we
immigrations?
necessarily need to identify the major groups. I think we can ask the questions that leads to people identifying the major groups.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is because if we take this as a strand in the concept and we want to talk about local communities, one local community may not be the same as every other local community. So if I try to identify all these groups, I can't identify a group for St. Louis. Maybe the St. Louis group is different than the Kansas City group, which is different than a Joplin group. Yeah. If we're going to say this is something that's going to carry down, do we want to make it that specific, or do we just ask the question to know there's going to be answers to it? So what did St. Louis look like 200 years ago, or even Chesterfield? I mean, if you look at Chesterfield, you're going to have urban sprawl. So what did Chesterfield look like 50 years ago? It's going to look entirely different than it does now. And there's whole conversations around just urban areas spreading out. You know,
So what you're saying is, if we're looking at an assessment document, you're leaning towards an instructional document. If we're looking at the assessment document, then you're looking at compare and contrast your
I would want
region
kids to be able
with,
to explain how their communities may have changed over time.
but to think of that in terms of verbs, you're looking at compare and contrast, or to outline change over time, or to, I think you have to say it in a way like that for what we're writing. Now, can we switch that over to questions? Maybe that second piece, that's what we look at, or what are the questions that match this?
It could be compare and contrast. My only concern with compare and contrast is I hope it forces them to go deep enough, and that it doesn't become some sort of a. I can see it. You could use Venn diagrams. You could use all kinds of things with it. So I could see that, and to me, that's going to force them to come up with some of these things without us just saying, here's all the answers, because I just sometimes worry that leads to a memorization of all the answers. And there may be some changes. Not that we think, and I understand there's got to be the fact where we have about just knowing there's these basic facts and background knowledge that's necessary, but I think if we ask the right question, it leads to the right background knowledge anyway.
I get torn between living in both worlds, because that's where my gut is. But spending a lot of time curriculum writing, I know, like in revisiting the curriculum that we did as a K-12 group, where we kind of started with that, what's important, what's the big question, what are the big questions that we want answered, and then living with that for 2 years, and the reality of some of those questions weren't as easy to answer as we thought because of what we didn't lay out, I guess. And so now we're going back and laying out. I don't know, I'm not making myself very clear.
No, for me, the difficulty with what I'm saying is, I'm going to look at Aaron. Does he have the resources to be able to answer the questions that I'm just asking? Do we expect, so Aaron, if you got a document that says, what does your community look like 20, 50 years ago, do you have the resources currently to even be able to answer all those questions? Does everybody have those resources in that? Do they have the way that would require some work? It's going to require some research on behalf of the educator to even be able to answer the questions themselves before they teach. Right. You'd have to go back to
That'd be great. Something online.
But it would require a whole different set of what we may have expected of people in the
20 miles away from our school.
That's great. That's great if
also making it relevant for the students. Do counties, do the individual counties have, have some kind of historical society where you could get that information?
Our school goes to the museum of historical studies.
I mean,
All the
that's-
pictures of the progression of the Great Tornado that went through and this and that. Yeah, they do that in Lower Elementary sometimes.
And a lot of times it's online. So comes down to that. It's a one-time setup, wouldn't it be? Now, as far as assessing it,
My concern is that if you don't put some of the major pieces, then teachers won't dig, they don't have time to dig at the K-4, K-5 to come up with what are those major pieces. So if it's not written in a resource already, they won't find unless you put it on there that they think, oh, I've got to find it, they won't take the time.
just skip it.
I think that's what I was saying about prioritizing, you know, like we had a really grand idea about explorers in second grade and Marco Polo and Christopher Columbus. Well, it's really easy to find some things in second grade with Christopher Columbus. Marco Polo, not so much. So can you teach it? Yes, by lecturing and telling. And so, which isn't to say that there aren't some things that are just that way. But what I feel like we need is a balance in things that are rich enough and appropriate enough that you can go deeper versus there's some things that are just a sell and move on. You know, that I think we have to have a balance of those things. And for me, it's very difficult to finding that balance and what's the selling and what's the possibility for going deeper and not overburdening with selling. It's just what the balance is.
More popular pieces, are more heavy at the lower levels, and you can find materials you need.
Now I'm gonna go back to, if you frame it as questions, does it help to figure out whatever that first question may actually be? I guess what I mean by that is if it's a what are the landmarks or what are the monuments that we have in America that promote, that you see that promote our values? Those are more of a, you're gonna get, they're concrete, identifiable things. Right, well, it might be marble, but, yeah, I mean,
Concrete.
some are concrete.
And so in the standard that's written as identify and explain the significance of landmarks of our U.S. heritage.
Yeah,
So that's how you write it as a standard. So if we were to talk about migration in kindergarten, or this concept in kindergarten, it could be identify where your family originated in the world. Fun. Open to it as deep as you want to take it as a teacher.
Right, and they only may get to where their parents, right? I mean,
Grandma and grandpa is that's as far as they're gonna get. Kindergarten, first grade, grandma and grandpa. That's it.
Some may get to the great-grandparents.
But they get the idea that they came from someplace.
Right. If they're living.
Yeah,
living
I mean,
this
that's it,
way.
yeah.
When you have 16-year-olds having kids, and then the next generation, some of those you
Young
have like,
great-great.
right, you have great-grandmas that
Within
are.
40 years, you can have two
It-
Even
generations.
if you go on Ancestry.com and type in your last name, and it says Ireland, Great Britain, you can go, okay. Okay, I don't know my family, but the name originated here. Wow, that opens up a whole lot you can do with it, or you can stop.
Right.
Curriculum first.
You could have a map and just put ribbons of, just looking at last
And how
name,
cool would that
just
be in your
put
school?
Ribbons
Mhm.
of, man, look where this ribbon comes from and connects to.
Wow.
Where would that, I mean, there are ways to do that.
And you know, it's built on the idea that Americans, all of us come from someplace, somewhere, sometime. And it's tied to the child and their family, and it gives them a chance to dialogue about their personal history, which I see is up there.
Yeah, I like it, that's good start.
Okay, time for lunch?
No. Do what?
Time for lunch?
Students order in pizzas.
I'm gonna write the idea here, just so I can look at it and start
See you
thinking
right.
towards it. What did you say? Tell me one more time.
Something like identify where your family came from in the world. It's very rough language, it's just something to play with. And I think it's probably not written formally enough,
Right.
the rest of it, but that's the gist of it. Originated in the world.
Yeah.
It'll make an interesting discussion in my family.
It'd be fun. It'd be fun in a classroom.
Because if you think about it, my wife is, how many generations? There's Irish in there, and my kids are, what would my kids be considered? First generation or?
And my family on both sides were here before there was the United States.
So, my roots go all the way back to South America too, so Peru. That's a heck of an interesting concept.
Like Nick had is compare perspectives of people in the past to those in the present. So how did past experience, how is my family, and then the supporting question of how is my family past similar to and different from my peers' families.
Yeah.
But the standard is compare perspectives of people in the past to those in the present.
Yeah, we've got a little
That's a
bit of
kindergarten standard.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of that perspectives of the American Revolution.
And then they have you compare life in the past to life today, and then generate questions about individuals and groups who have shaped a significant historical change.
Yeah, so those seem to be here too, right? But here they're tailored to specific time periods and places. So there's perspectives of the American Revolution, and there's knowledge of the way Missourians have interacted, survived, and progressed from distant past to present times. So kind of the same concept, except much more narrow in our standards than that. That really opens it up for a richer discussion.
Well, they do narrow it through their components. They narrow it with the questions that would answer.
Okay.
So they give the standard like the assessment. So like if, for example, if there's change, continuity, and context. History standard, kindergarten, K.1 is generate life in the past to life today. Compare life in the past to life today. K.2 is generate questions about individuals and groups who have shaped a significant change. And then underneath that, they have a compelling question, which is how do our communities and the people who live in them change over time? And then underneath that, they have supporting questions. So how does the time in which we live affect us? How is the past different from today? And how has my family changed? Where they live, what they do. So they give the questions that answer the standard that they're going to assess.
Which is kind of what you were saying, that's a
Right.
secondary document.
Right. And those, like they compare life in the past and life today, that's the thing that continues on. Like there's similar themes that seem to look at the third grade, they have a very similar question. It's just, but then they, a similar standard, but then they change the compelling questions and the supporting questions underneath. But I think it's very similar. Gabby, how do you feel about identifying where your family is?
I was looking at it yesterday. Who do you identify there? It was when,
Well, you're probably truly just identifying at that point.
Right.
Because you can't really, kindergarten kids can't describe their heritage.
Compare and contrast. All those sorts of things are a little bit later.
The term we used to was the tell word instead of identifying word.
Then if we went to school, if we wanted to, you know, just crowd this curriculum right up, fill in every cell, and then just keep doing the same thing.
You could, yeah, it could be another school would originate someplace else.
Maybe school and community or at that area. And this is where we could talk about how the community's changed over time.
Which would be what, grade three?
Through the movement of people. That would be grade 1 or 2. 1. Except we want to fill up every cell.
Right. Do we skip to grade 2 and think through just your larger community, that area? In Missouri, can we describe the, let's say I'm thinking culture and traditions, and that's a whole different strand. If you're in St. Louis, you can drive to parts of the city and notice complete,
Big changes.
right.
Different.
If
Migration
you're
pattern.
in Ozark, if you understand enough of the history, you can find it. If you're just driving down the road, you probably wouldn't know it.
Is maybe grade 2 where we talk about Native Americans?
That's what, I thought that's what you said, what, didn't you? Don't you do Native Americans in second grade?
Sports.
But they're only, it's second grade only history, we right now. Just comparing and contrasting daily life.
And so what would be a nice companion to that would be within the land bridge discussion and the migration of Native Americans across the country as they were pushed out by the Europeans on the East Coast.
I think that's one of those things that feels like mission that you have to articulate in order for teachers to see that target.
Otherwise, they don't get it. They go for, let's make a chart of where Indians are in the state of Missouri.
Not recognize that many of them came from someplace else.
Okay, somebody wanna,
And this, Patrick, I guess I see this kind of as what you were talking about, is, you know, who lived here in the past.
I think you can say compare the life in our community in the past to life in our community in the present.
In first grade or for second grade.
Well, I think that's what
I
we're
guess
talking about in
second.
second grade, but that, I'm just wondering if that we're talking about our community, it doesn't necessarily fit. If we're going to do something with regions there. But it looks like we,
I thought it was a school community in one.
all right, but then if you go on and see where it says regions, that even we do talk a lot about community, regional timeline, community timelines. And I think right there, even just that first one where it says regional timeline, community timeline, that fits exactly what we're talking about here.
So, do we want to tighten this up a little bit from life to people? Because we're actually, the concept is, because I could read that as, oh, okay, they used to churn butter with,
right,
with the butter churn on the porch, now we go and buy it at the store, right?
right.
So do we, and this concept is about movement of people. So we want to talk about compare the people who lived in our community in the past to the people who live in our community, or something like that.
If we're looking at people, that the main strand is people, movement of people, compare people in our community today with people in our community in the past.
And in some places that's changed dramatically, some places it hasn't.
Right, maybe a lot the same.
Well, it's an example where I went to school, when I moved there in '75, there were no African Americans. I mean, none.
Still exists in some schools today.
Our school had none. Now we have a small influence of them. So that would be an important factor because now your culture is changing too.
Our district, it would range from anywhere from like 12% to 8%.
Same in our,
school year.
we're in the same school.
See, that's an important thing to look
Okay,
at
so
too.
what if we just did something like identify what cultures and communities were present in your community?
I like that.
In the
one,
past.
culture and people and culture.
Compare life and daily
Maybe it's
culture.
compare, I don't know if it's compare cultures and communities that were present in your town 25, 50, 100 years ago to present. Yeah, I don't know if that's the, or you do, I'm just trying to take.
I think culture and people would encompass the life part.
So, do we just stick with people here and put a note in tradition and culture, we've gotta add it,
Yeah, that's how I was going to look and see if we have that there.
because we've got,
In the individuals and groups then.
Strand six.
So I think we're looking at a historical framework of what
Right.
cultures and communities were
What's
present
changed.
in a place. So
Right.
it's not necessarily the interaction of them or the relationships with them, it's what was actually here.
okay, I'm good, I'm just asking.
I was thinking one of the same thing when I first was even kind of working through it in my head, but that's the time frame. I think what, if we comparing past, like what do we mean? But I don't know how specific to get. I don't know, like 25, 100, 200. I think there's 100 years ago is, I think even there's a big difference between 200 years ago, obviously from the years, but it's also 200 years ago from now, Missouri wasn't the state.
Right.
In the past 200 years, multiple times.
Okay, that looks well. I'm just taking notes here, Fair?
Yeah, I'm just trying to come up with how would we say that, we're trying to get.
We say across time.
We could say, so just after today,
That
across
leaves it up to
time.
the district discretion of what that time period is. I really like the idea of it. Overall.
So does across time, would that go after community? And so we would hope they would look at today.
It's nice within the historical,
I think I would put it across multiple time periods.
Across.
So
Good with
that
that.
it floated, you know.
Across multiple.
time period. What's nice about that is it also keeps a focus on history to some degree, but it's talking about people and how they lived in this specific place what we call our community now, across time, which gives us that historical dimension. And allows for the discussion of who was here, when did they live here, where did they go, who's here now, and all of that. So it could become a really rich thing to teach. And is open enough, like if we use the term in our community, so for the rural communities, you don't have to limit it to town or whatever.
Do community/region?
I'm tempted.
I think that's gonna be.
I think it would fit in.
I leave that community and allow communities to determine how big they need to make it fit for them.
Yeah, I'm good that way too.
Because I think if you put community/regions, and I feel like I know I have to do my community, then I gotta figure out what my region is, and do the same thing for region.
So
And is that really what we want them to get?
You,
Kathy, what?
It's a different
I worry if we put community/region, that I've got to just for the community, then I have to redo it again for my region. And I don't really think that knowing the specifics is not still, I mean, I think that's part of it, maybe, but, and then again, is there gonna be that much of a difference? Like, I'm actually worried that if we try to do the same thing for state, it's gonna be very similar for the state also, and that we're gonna end up just duplicating the same process again, when we may have already had it, and is there another way to do it just a little bit different with it? So I would worry about doing it community, region, you know,
Well,
that we're
in
doing
the
the exact
state,
same process.
in the state, do we start including what's already up there? Because we're looking at migration, we're looking at immigration.
Concept in a deeper way.
Right, because here we're looking at just, how it affects me, what I can see around me. I mean, I would look at, if we, to take that in Ozark, we'd look at the Ozarks. And look at,
And to me, that kindergarten one is more aligned to the depth of what third grade is now in terms of where it comes. To me, a better kindergarten one might be compare my family in the past and present. I think
Well, my mom was married 3 times, so 15 years ago, we had one dad.
But that's history for that kid.
Right, so is that what you're talking about? I mean, that's,
You know, I'm a kindergartner 5 years ago, I don't look like I look today. That's kind of what I'm talking about. You know,
Which is, I think, is a completely different concept.
So that follow the migration.
That's kind of under historical thinking.
is there a concept called historical thinking? There is not.
Not that there shouldn't be, because I agree, I like those personal
But you're
histories.
trying to get young children to think, have to understand the concept of past and present. And at this point, the existing curriculum doesn't really have that.
Right?
But to me, just understanding past and present is a totally different concept from where I originated in the world.
What'd you
We
say?
don't even do continents and oceans at this point until 2nd grade, and now we're identifying where we originated in the world. I just think that there's just a gap there for me. And
What'd you say? You didn't say comparing concepts, what did you say?
or
Describe my family.
well, up there we have like a personal timeline, you know, I just, I'm trying to make it connect with
Okay.
that idea.
What did
I
you
guess.
say, what did you say to Lola?
I said compare and contrast my family in the past and present, or maybe it should be compare and no, but that's the same, that's really no different than, if you say compare and contrast families past and present, that's really not any different than grade 2.
Right.
And so I'm trying to figure out how to, I keep thinking about it in terms of the question, I know my family changed over time, how have I changed over time? I'm just trying to say backwards. Some of them I don't think will come backwards. Way down. And can it be meaningful necessarily?
Yeah, I like the bigger concept that you're talking about, and one that doesn't exist in our standards, which is historical thinking, the understanding the passage of time.
So maybe it's how
But I think
well,
that is.
I don't know whether it's K or 1, it might be better at 1, but compare and contrast school past and present over several time periods. Because school 25 years ago did not have Chromebooks. And school 100 years ago didn't have, I don't know, textbooks.
Textbooks, yeah.
But
And they were one room.
There were one room, yeah.
But that's a very different concept than migration.
I agree with
movement
you.
of people.
I agree.
That's why I keep saying maybe there is a concept that's missing, which is, you know, the passage of time, or
And what I'm saying is it may be that there's a concept that's K1, 2, and that's where that concept finishes, and then a new concept starts
So it would be, prior to A.
Yes.
Okay.
Patrick, what are you thinking?
No, I'm just taking it, because
I'm taking.
all of what we're talking about, I will say, does kind of show up in some of these other states. So like the compare perspectives, they have a strength, not really a strength, they have a section called perspectives. And it's compare perspectives of people in the past to those in the present. That's what their standard is. And then, for example, it's how is my family's past similar to and different from my peers? And how do past experiences shape who we are today, family, homeschool? So it's there. I just don't know. I mean, I just don't know if it fits directly in the way we have it kind of laid out.
Right.
But I feel like a lot of things we're bringing up, like I think they've answered it. In this, it's just a different framework.
Yeah.
It just looks different.
Absolutely.
And they saw the big overall like history, and then underneath history there's change, continuity, and context, there's perspectives, they have historical sources and evidence, and those seem to be consistent throughout all of the grade levels. Causation and argumentation and whatnot.
Timelines are introduced in inquiry skills in grade 3.
So we don't do them before then? How do we do that? I like the idea of a personal timeline.
Me too. But I'm just saying, that's a statement of fact, not opinion.
Okay. I'm just wondering, so do we,
So it means,
Personal/family timeline?
at least it wasn't the old ones. I don't know if we moved it. Did we move it in the inquiry standard? Because in the previous inquiry standards, it appears in third grade.
let's see about that.
Because when Kathy was talking about us trying to find a nice link, and it wasn't working.
Come on, one word or two.
One.
One.
Because it underlines it in red things.
And be all about me, the pretty standard kindergarten, first grade, that project, all about me book. I don't think we got to say exactly what, this project takes. It's just the idea that the students, the young children starting to develop that sense of passage of time. And how the
One of the
changes that
things
come with
too,
that.
one of the things they use, I don't know if they still do, but they used to do the 4 seasons books. And they would donate it, and it showed the same scenery different times in the seasons. And then of course they expanded it from there, okay, what clothing would you wear, what would the weather be during that time and all that stuff. I don't know if they still do that or not.
In our social studies inquiry, we don't have it for grade 3.
Right.
Still, our changes, we don't have it for grade 3.
So I don't think we need to necessarily specify the form of the output as much as it is what the student should be able to do. And then when you link that with the inquiry standard, that helps the teacher, they want to think about those two things. Yeah.
Was that it?
Creating personal history. Up to what point? Present?
So then,
Well, if you're 6 years old.
8 years isn't very long.
and then, if you've got, a district with a lot of technology, maybe they do something that's, a Prezi or something, and if it's not, or the teacher doesn't want to do that, wants to do something more with manipulatives.
Well, with computer labs and all that, you can tie it into that.
I think we're getting into curriculum.
Yeah, so that's why I like this, create a
Okay.
personal history.
This is not-
And then you leave up whether it happens, how it happens to the district curriculum.
Yeah, because you might just write a book, a story.
Yeah.
Small
Mhm.
moments, book, something like that.
Many different ways to do that.
So why is that one not kindergarten, first grade, go along with still school, family?
Oh, because I looked under one, it's a person timeline, but it's under two as well. There's no reason.
You can put it in all three of them.
Well, I think it's nice in the first one, and it also then connects with the previous standard above, about where your family comes from. The origin of your family. So that can be part of that first one. And then, and what Kathy's contributed here is this whole concept of historical thinking, which becomes a way to help young people understand the past of time and how they can see it and what it means.
When we were talking about relevancy earlier.
Right.
And if you start that way, you can build that. Instead of all of a sudden.
I think you're right, Kathy. This might be, earlier I heard you say that maybe this is something that just goes for 2 or 3 grades and stops, because at that point, from child development, we know that understanding the past history becomes much more of a natural ability.
So is this a K2 standard?
Could be. K3. I mean, you're building foundations, what in that, what understanding in the upper grades kind of to have a concept of time.
Well, it's really neat what's there right now, if you look at it. In kindergarten, just those 2 standards fit nicely together, talk about 2 different concepts, but within the child, understanding, relative to the child. In grade 1, you go on and we start looking at the changes in the school historically, but we don't have to talk about migration of people in school. You could if you wanted to there, but you wouldn't have to. And then in grade 2, we go back to looking at maybe the people within our community and how that's changed over time.
Don't you think that goes, because that's not about movement of people necessarily? Or are you thinking about it in terms of?
But it depends on your community, doesn't it?
Right, I would think of it in terms of immigration. Here's what the Ozarks look like. And then here's what.
And this would make it that, because it's in that concept line.
Right. Here's who's immigrated into our community.
Versus the architecture,
Only if
for
the
instance.
inquiry question is guided by the movement, because it depends on if this document rolls out in the district with that concept there or not.
Right.
Because if you just look at it alone, if you just look at it by itself, I don't necessarily think of
Mhm.
it through the lens of movement of people.
Right.
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 There are 5 generations of my family in Independence. They've been there a long time. I don't think of them as moving because they've been there a long time.
think that's the whole reason why we have concepts, is that we think that they're gonna have value. Otherwise, you have to specify everything in every cell. If you think that it's gonna be read in isolation of the concepts, which, I don't think we want to do that. Because Laura would kill us for the redundancy.
Probably watching the lack of us writing anything, so she just signed off.
And unfortunately, the anonymous whatever left to.
Yeah.
The anonymous record.
I can't take it any longer.
All right, let's push forward. Historical perspective and thinking. Should it continue any further?
Well, I'm wondering if on that one, we talked about clocks and calendars and time. Is that really where that piece fits inside passage of time? No, you will not find that anywhere.
But maybe you create a school year timeline. I mean, it's right there in front of them, of school. And I don't know if that's very specific, that's very curriculum-ish. I mean, very dictating instruction, but. Or create a
It's-
class timeline.
you can't-
Create a class timeline, or something that
You can't
they have
find-
to watch it build.
You can't find time in our reserve leagues. So is that a math skill? Some,
But that's a different concept of time.
right? But you can't find that either place. You can't find time. You can't find read a clock. That is in there. But the concept of time as a whole is not.
This is actually progression of time versus being able to tell time, which is a math concept.
Right.
So, I mean,
This is time to now, where that's, so maybe the book now.
So tell me a little bit on this. Go ahead.
I don't know what it means, but I'm just thinking that's the thing adults don't have a concept of. Well, I mean, that's so different with everybody. Some people are like, man, tell lies. The older you get, the more you see that. That does, I guess I don't understand, how do you figure out if you taught the concept of passing of time? I mean, to them, adults are super smart. I don't understand how to
Good
qualify,
question.
how to
Good,
qualify that.
that's a good question. How do you
I know
teach
people
that?
my age that can't.
how do you teach or assess?
How do you assess it?
I guess maybe that's a better way of saying it. How do you qualify that? I don't know.
Well, right now, some of the simple or fun activities I used to do with my first graders is implements from the 1900s to implements from today. Cook stove, refrigerators. Where did, old timers still use the term icebox? Why was it called an icebox?
Okay, so you're understanding the times more than the passage.
Right.
To me, because
Right.
that I think is very, very relevant to understand the times.
So,
Things that happen then, why they have, that's understanding the time, not maybe the passage of time.
This-
I don't
this-
know, to me, I'm having a hard time.
see,
getting that.
this may be off topic here, but one of the things is, I found some old encyclopedias where you're looking at stuff from the 40s and 50s, and the concept of space travel in the 40s and 50s. You look at that stuff and ideas they had in those days, and now you look at what we're doing in our day and time, you can see that the ideas they had back then, some of them were very feasible and they came to fruition, and some of them were just so far-fetched, you're going, what were they thinking? But based on what they had to what it is now.
Where they're at that time.
So same thing with automobiles and stuff.
Watching the whole Star Trek and flip phone.
Phone.
That was the first one.
I think we have, in primary, we have used primary and secondary sources down there, right? We did that across all grade levels. So,
Okay.
Mhm.
could it be something that's like just wondering if we're starting to cross over into a tool of inquiry thing. Where does the tool of inquiry end and the history begin? Because you would want it to, if you're thinking of focusing on time, you're building the understanding of timeline, which is a tool of inquiry thing.
Right.
That's why we dropped it out of it. And the way I read that concept is to help, especially young children, understand the passage of time. That's their developing, psychologically. And that's why I think it's probably limited to how great that state of self.
Because I was thinking of, putting artifacts or sources like photographs in sequential order. You would with assistance from us.
Yeah, I think that's an inquiry.
I'm gonna write that one down.
We don't say that's
Right,
inquiry,
it's
we
in
just
here.
say use.
And it's already in here, I think.
What did we?
It says use primary and secondary sources. That's what I.
Or identify primary and secondary sources that are recorded before and use journals and photos.
Because that's a history thing.
Right,
That's
but-
looking at past and,
but
that's
that's where-
using sources in terms of
Right,
historical
so you take,
context.
you say, okay, as a teacher, I'm gonna write some curriculum down, which is separate from the standards, but I'm gonna use the standard. The standard says create a personal history, and then the inquiry standard says use photos. Put those two together, I end up with the book that's a personal history with photos. If photos is what I want to use, maybe I'll use letters, maybe I'll use whatever else.
Well, they
is
can't
listed in
read
the
that.
inquiry. But I mean, it's in the inquiry.
Right.
Whatever's in the
Yeah.
inquiry standard, so the inquiry standard tells you that.
What if we just take, I know we're talking schools in grade 1, can't we just take that bit and just change out schools and make it family in the past and in the present?
Yes,
I think you can do compare and contrast families and schools in the past and the present, but I don't think it's any different than what grade 2 says. How is it different than comparing and contrasting the culture and people in your community?
I think it depends on what you're talking about. Exactly what you talk about that. That's specific, that's almost a demographic question.
Yeah.
Whereas to me, this one is about what was life like for that family. What was your family's life like in the past versus what is your family's life like in the present? What is life like? School to me is tough, unless we're going to look at a historical view of a one-room schoolhouse versus what school looks like now. And I'm not sure, is that what? And I know Larry, we're trying to fit with school and community, but I could see it actually, I might go over just school as a part of a community, and it could work into the community, but I might go straight to community there. I'm not sure what it looks like in grade 2, but
Are you talking about the historical perspective one?
yeah, and make it compare, what is life, compare your family's
So
life
you
in the
put
past
like
to your
a
family's
parenthesis-
life in the future.
Like if you put like a parenthesis after community, that you could say schools.
And I think you can compare your community.
So are you guys bouncing between concept A?
I'm going where the
and-
thing is actually blinking, where the cursor actually
Okay.
is blinking.
Oh, in kindergarten.
But there's nothing in there that says community.
No, I know that. What I'm saying is like that.
I think you're talking about community.
That's what I'm talking about, community. But what I'm saying is right here in this line, in this first part, this would
Kindergarten.
say, kindergarten, right where the little cursor's blinking.
Okay.
I would add, it could be something along the lines of compare your family in the past to your family in the present. I don't know what exactly that sounds like. And then the next one would be compare the community in the past and your community in the present. And then you're looking at all those different things about how it's changed over a period of time. And that's going to give you that idea of it's changed over a period of time. In the past, it looked like this. Now it looks like this. And then you could even, if you want to have fun, say, what might it look like 50 years from now? And they can tell you all about flying cars, but I think I don't know. I think we can get there with just having them look at what it was like in the past. Now, the pictures in a school would be a part of it. That may be a question of, for example, what kind of things do school children do? What might school have looked like in your community? I mean, not even been a school in your community 50 years ago. But
Especially with one of the schoolhouses being consolidated over that period of time.
I would probably just change in that historical perspective line. I would just, my initial thought is to go to communities as opposed to schools, even in maybe grade 1. But
So that's what you're thinking, except you're thinking maybe even include community.
well, I wasn't sure we were totally getting away from A. If we're still looking at something with migration, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know if we can do it that way. That's where it fits in. I don't know if it's something we need to know where families migrate. I don't know. So or if that's just something that can come up. Because if you did migrate, if you have a family that did migrate in the last 50 years, when you compare your family 50 years ago, it's going to look entirely different. If you're a first generation versus those would be conversations that would inevitably pop up.
All right, I'm thinking this is a lunch conversation, it's 1 o'clock. Let's eat lunch. Then come back. So maybe it's, you leave this one potentially up here. And this is just a K1 strand.
I think I like the fact of saying that schools might be too narrow, and instead you want to talk about, the community.
Yeah, because if you, my school, for example, is 16 years old.
But you're talking about the concept of school.
Right, so that's different. That's what I'm saying. So
No,
then
I
we
was
start talking
thinking
about
the community.
one-room schoolhouses, and we're going to compare schooling in general. We're going to, I think that's.
Well, it's
those
a
are two-
concept of time. How do we learn back then? How do we learn now?
Right.
But
I think
is
that's
is that better situated in a larger community? Because if you say community, that could include schools.
Potentially.
I mean, are we teaching
ours
the history of
does.
schooling?
It's small.
Right, and I'm just wondering, knowing in depth what schooling looked like 50 years ago, is that something that I feel is vital?
I know where I used to live, that was had a little more rural around it, that one of the things that they would do in studying the community was go to the existing school building. But it was part of understanding the community and how life had changed over time with the community
Right.
versus school specific.
I'm gonna leave that there for now. Just so we know what we're talking about.
Because you could also because that could also take in the passage of time of linking to some other standards in terms of, how the land has been changed for use over time
Right.
in your community.
Right.
This used to all be farms, now it's not. All those sorts of things.
Right. Communication.
Yeah, because it can tie into that, I think that's in geography.
Right.
But that's all of those.
Of
And you look to the
topic,
inquiries,
no.
you look to the inquiry standard and say, okay, how can I teach this to the children in first grade? The inquiry standard says, hey, look at these things, how they can use these artifacts, these items, these skills.
Right. Okay. Got a lot of conversation. Let's eat.
What are we doing? You guys established your pattern last time?
So wherever the heck we want to go. No patterns.
Let's think historically.